While I was paying taxes from my every paycheck, someone who just crossed the border got $5,000 in government aid. Want to know how that's possible? It started with something I read on a local community forum. A woman had posted that her cousin, who had entered the United States illegally only a few months ago, had just received $5,000 in assistance. The post didn't give many details, just enough to spark a storm of reactions. Some were outraged, others skeptical, but it hit a nerve with me. I've been working legally in this country for over 10 years. Every month, federal and state taxes come straight out of my paycheck. I never questioned it. I believe that was the price of living in a society that promised opportunity and fairness. But this one post made me wonder if the system was really as fair as I thought. At first, I assumed it was either misinformation or an exaggerated story. But I couldn't let it go. I started asking questions, not just online, but in person. I talked to a friend who works at a local community center that provides services to recent immigrants. She confirmed that yes, in some cases, undocumented individuals can qualify for certain types of aid. Not directly through federal programs, but through local and state initiatives, nonprofit partnerships, and emergency relief efforts. She mentioned a program run through a coalition of NGOs and local governments designed to provide emergency cash assistance to low-income individuals during a public health emergency. While technically not a federal handout, it was funded indirectly through federal relief funds, channeled through states and redistributed by partner organizations. And yes, recipients were not always required to prove legal status, only to demonstrate residency in the state and financial hardship. That's when it hit me. While I was working full-time, paying rent, utilities, groceries, and taxes, someone who just crossed the border without any legal documentation could walk into a local aid office, describe their hardship, and potentially receive a cash grant. It felt unfair. Not because I didn't believe people in desperate situations deserve help. I do. But because the people funding these programs, like myself, often aren't even aware of how their money's being used. There's a fundamental disconnect between the taxpayer and the policy machinery that decides how aid is distributed. I decided to dig deeper into how this was legally and structurally possible. I looked up state-level emergency cash assistance programs launched during the pandemic. Many of them were designed quickly to address economic fallout. At the time, speed was prioritized over regulation. Documentation requirements were loosened. Applicants didn't need a Social Security number, only a proof of address and a declaration of income loss. In California, for instance, the Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants program provided $500 per individual, up to $1,000 per household, specifically to undocumented adults who were ineligible for federal pandemic relief. The program was run in partnership with 12 nonprofit organizations and funded with $75 million from the state budget. What shocked me even more was how quietly these programs were rolled out. There was minimal media coverage. If you didn't know what to look for, you wouldn't even know they existed. But among immigrant communities, word traveled fast. Flyers were printed in Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Arabic, but not English. That wasn't an accident. These were targeted efforts, focused exclusively on communities that didn't qualify for federal aid. I also found reports from advocacy groups showing how millions in taxpayer dollars were routed into housing assistance, food vouchers, and direct cash support for undocumented residents in sanctuary cities. In New York, a one-time program offered undocumented workers a lump sum payment, up to $15,600, if they could prove loss of income and residence in the state during the pandemic. Meanwhile, those of us with jobs were navigating the bureaucratic maze of unemployment offices, sometimes getting delayed or denied because of minor paperwork issues. We followed the rules. We waited, we paid into the system. But when the system responded to crisis, we weren't the priority. One man I spoke with was an Uber driver. He lost most of his income during lockdowns. He had been filing taxes for 5 years and had a valid ATN number. When he applied for relief, he was told he didn't qualify for certain programs because his income hadn't dropped below a specific threshold. Meanwhile, his undocumented roommate, who worked part-time under the table at a restaurant, got assistance through a community relief initiative funded with city grants. It's not that these individuals are doing anything wrong by accepting help. Most are fleeing hardship, violence, or poverty in their home countries. But when government aid flows toward people who haven't contributed to the tax base, while those who have, including low-income citizens, are left scrambling, it creates resentment, it fuels division, and worst of all, it erodes trust. What's more, there's no single agency overseeing all this. Much of this aid is decentralized. Counties, cities, nonprofits. They all operate independently, using their own criteria. And when funds are dispersed without strict oversight or verification systems, abuse becomes not only possible, but predictable. Some of the people applying for these funds use aliases, fake documents, or borrowed addresses. In a few cases, social workers I interviewed said they suspected duplicate applications from the same household under different names, but didn't have the resources or authority to investigate. They were told to process applications quickly, not verify identities. The reason this matters isn't just about the money, it's about what it says to the public. When hardworking legal residents see their taxes fund programs that feel invisible to them but easily accessible to others, the message they receive is, "You're not the priority." That message, repeated often enough, leads to alienation. And that alienation is showing up everywhere. In elections, in protests, in the growing backlash against sanctuary policies. It's not about race. It's not about hate. It's about fairness. When people don't feel seen or valued by their own government, they look for answers, and often they find them in anger. What surprised me most, though, was how hard it was to get clear answers. I called state agencies, asked for data, read dozens of public records. In most cases, I was either referred elsewhere or told that demographic data wasn't collected on recipients. In other words, the government didn't know, or didn't want to know, how much aid went to undocumented individuals. That vagueness isn't accidental. It's a shield against scrutiny. Yet the numbers we do have are enough to raise questions. In Illinois, a 2021 audit found that more than $10 million in COVID-19 emergency rental assistance went to undocumented immigrants. In Los Angeles, a one-time cash program issued prepaid debit cards of up to $1,000 to qualifying low-income families. Documentation was not required beyond self-attestation. Self-attestation, that's the loophole. It means applicants can simply declare their income and circumstances without needing to prove them, and in a system already stretched thin, with overworked staff and minimal enforcement, there's little incentive to verify. I'm not blaming the people who accept help when it's offered. Most of us would do the same in their position. But I am questioning the system that allows this to happen while the people funding it, legal residents, middle-class workers, struggling families, are often overlooked. This isn't just about immigration. It's about how government priorities are set, how transparency is avoided, and how narratives are shaped to keep the public from asking uncomfortable questions. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. After everything I had uncovered, the emergency aid programs, the self-attestation loopholes, the millions in taxpayer dollars redirected through nonprofit channels, I decided to take one more step. I wanted to see what would happen if I asked directly. I started by contacting my local representative's office. I wasn't angry or confrontational, just curious. I sent an email asking for clarification on whether public funds had been used to support undocumented individuals during the pandemic, and if there was a mechanism to track how much of it went to those not legally in the country. The reply came a week later. It was vague, generic, and filled with talking points. Our office supports all communities in times of crisis, it said. We work to ensure equitable relief for those in need. Not a single mention of how funds were distributed or what oversight existed. It was like asking for the time and being handed a brochure about the concept of sunlight. So I went further. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the state agency managing relief disbursements. I asked for disaggregated data showing the breakdown of recipients by legal status. A few weeks later, I got a formal reply. We do not collect or store immigration status information as a condition of program participation. In other words, there's no record, no audit trail, no accountability. I asked around in local government circles, spoke to someone at the state auditor's office. They told me, off the record, that when these programs were designed, asking about legal status was considered politically risky. It was easier not to know, they said. That line stuck with me. Easier not to know, because if you don't know, you can't be held responsible. And if no one is responsible, then no one is ever really accountable. And the taxpayer, we're just expected to keep paying. One city official I contacted admitted that during the height of the pandemic, oversight wasn't the priority. We were told to move fast and get the money out the door. The goal was speed and coverage, not gatekeeping. When I asked if they worried about fraud, she said, "Of course we did, but verifying status or income would have slowed everything down, and no one wanted to be the person who delayed aid during a crisis." That logic might make sense in a boardroom, but it doesn't hold up for the average American. Most people I spoke with didn't even know these programs existed. And when I shared the information that some undocumented residents received thousands in relief payments while legal workers struggled to get through clogged unemployment lines, the reaction was always the same: disbelief, then frustration. What made it worse was realizing that many of these programs didn't end after the peak of the pandemic. Some morphed into permanent relief initiatives, quietly absorbed into local budgets or renewed through discretionary grants. They now exist as part of a broader patchwork of benefits that are selectively advertised and loosely monitored. In some cities, guaranteed income pilot programs are underway. These offer monthly stipends to low-income residents. And immigration status is not a disqualifying factor. Some are funded through private philanthropy, others through city budgets. Again, the beneficiaries are selected based on need, but the criteria are so flexible that enforcement is nearly impossible. Meanwhile, those of us working legally, filing taxes, and barely keeping up with inflation, we're being told there's no money left, that public schools need to cut budgets, that infrastructure repairs must wait, that social services are overwhelmed. But the truth is, millions are being spent, just not in places where accountability is required, not in ways that can be audited, not in systems that the average taxpayer can even begin to understand. At one point, I thought maybe I was overreacting, that perhaps this was just a rare flaw in an otherwise functional system. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. This isn't the exception, it's the design. Nonprofits act as intermediaries, distributing funds outside of normal government channels. They aren't subject to the same transparency laws. They don't have to disclose as much. They're funded by public money but operate without public oversight. And often they're protected by the same politicians who champion these programs. The ones who also benefit from their support come election time. It's a closed loop, a feedback cycle. The taxpayer funds the state funds nonprofits. The nonprofits distribute aid based on flexible, politically favorable criteria. And when someone asks questions, they're dismissed as lacking compassion, or worse, labeled. But asking questions isn't hateful. It's responsible. It's necessary. Because when we lose track of how public funds are used, we lose something more important than money. We lose trust. I talked to one woman, a nurse in a public hospital. She told me she worked double shifts throughout the pandemic, got sick twice, and still went back to work. She applied for mortgage relief after her hours were cut and was denied because her income didn't drop enough. When she later found out her undocumented neighbor received over $4,000 in food, rent, and utility assistance, she felt betrayed. That sense of betrayal is spreading, quietly beneath the surface. It's not always loud or angry, but it's real, and it's growing. Not because people hate immigrants, but because they feel invisible to the very system they support. So where does that leave us? If we can't ask who gets the help, or how decisions are made, or where the money comes from, then what kind of democracy are we living in? If compassion is only extended in ways that are politically advantageous, and accountability is only demanded from the law-abiding, then what are we teaching the next generation of citizens? There's no easy answer. But there are real questions, and those questions deserve honest conversation. Not slogans, not headlines, not spin. Why are legal, tax-paying residents not prioritized for public relief programs? Why is immigration status deliberately excluded from data collection in programs funded by taxpayers? Why is transparency avoided when it comes to aid distribution? And most importantly, what kind of system are we becoming if silence is the only acceptable response? Let me know what you think. Is this a question of fairness or compassion or both? Should there be more transparency in how emergency aid is distributed, especially when public funds are involved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, the ones no one else is talking about, make sure to subscribe to the channel.